Hey folks, it never really occurred to me that I've never really had a Spyro video on my regular channel outside of Let's Plays. So, to start off this potentially new series, as well as celebrate the Purple Dragon's quarter of a century anniversary, I figured why don't we go ahead and talk about my different Spyro opinions. I'll be giving about one or two, maybe three different voice lines on my opinions on different things in the Spyro franchise. Ready? Go! The original Spyro the Dragon was a fantastic start to the series because it's a lot of fun despite not having a lot of variety in terms of gameplay. But where it lacks in gameplay variety, it definitely makes up for in world, environment, and level variety. It's just a lot of fun, and it's probably my second favorite Spyro game. Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage is my number one favorite video game in the franchise. Yes, it does have some flaws, like with the forced backtracking, some of the missions, and some of the glitches. It more than makes up for with the positives of this game. It adds more to the Spyro 1 gameplay, it refines it a little more, and it's just an overall really fun game with a colorful cast of characters. Spyro Year of the Dragon is a really fun game overall, but I would say it's the weakest of the original trilogy. On a casual or any percent run, whatever you want to call it, it's a pretty fun game and it has really great level design. In terms of a completionist run, that's a bit of a different story because a lot of these missions really frustrate me, and not to mention that the whole difficulty, it gets harder as you do better or it gets easier as you do worse thing, really bugs me, so it kind of makes it my least favorite in the original trilogy. But don't get me wrong, it's still a really fun game overall. Spyro Season of Ice, I didn't really like it all that much, but it's not completely the game's fault, as I'm just not really a big fan of games with an isometric view. But even taking away the isometric view, the game overall is just kind of boring. It's just a very meh kind of game. I mean, I appreciate the attempt at trying to make a 3D Spyro game on the go at the time, but it just wasn't doing it for me. Spyro 2 Season of Flame, on the other hand, is actually a pretty fun game, despite its isometric view. In fact, I would say that the isometric view is the only thing that bogs this game down from greatness. I mean, it's not exactly a flawless game even without that, there are still some frustrating missions a little later on, but it's still overall a decent game. Spyro Enter the Dragonfly is to the Spyro franchise what Sonic 06 is to the Sonic franchise. But unlike Sonic 06, I never really finished this game and I don't really plan to. I really don't have fun playing it, it's bogged down with a bunch of glitches, a bunch of frame rate drops that really give me a headache, and kind of boring level design overall if I'm being honest. It's just a rushed out piece of crap. Spyro Attack of the Rhinox I also never really finished, but it's not because the game is really bad, I just couldn't really get into it. The gameplay is basically overall like Season of Flame, except they added some role-playing elements here and there, and the level design kind of goes with that, so it feels like the levels are a lot bigger than they need to be, and I just couldn't get into it. Spyro Orange, the Cortex Conspiracy, is one of the games we got instead of a proper Crash and Spyro crossover game. Somehow it's even worse than Crash Purple, which was already a mediocre game, and it was the companion game that came out the same day, but I guess it has to do with the hub worlds and Spyro's normal gameplay, but overall the games are just crappy minigame collections. Spyro A Hero's Tale is a fine game, I just couldn't really get into it. The big reason is because I kept getting lost and didn't really know where to go. I keep hearing people say how easy the game is, how it's too easy, but I guess it's if you know where you're going. I don't want to have to keep looking up a guide to know where I'm going, and it just kept frustrating me, so I just gave up. I couldn't really get into the game. Spyro Shadow Legacy, I tried to get into it, I just couldn't. Before I played it, I kept hearing about how bad the game was or how mediocre the game was, and I figured it couldn't be that bad because a lot of people will say that about games I end up liking, so who knows, but I ended up trying it, and yeah, it was quite boring. The Legend of Spyro A New Beginning is a game that I very much have a guilty pleasure for. The gameplay can get pretty repetitive, the levels can kind of drag on a little bit, the cutscenes look pretty cheap, not counting the voice talent they hired, and there are a lot of moments where it's meant to be taken seriously but end up being hilarious. But despite all that, I still found the game to be pretty fun and engaging. Now when I say all that, I'm talking about the console versions. The portable versions on the DS and Game Boy Advance, they're okay. The Legend of Spyro the Eternal Night feels like a crappy expansion of the first game. It feels like they took an expansion, made the levels way too long, and made the game really frustrating near the end just to make it feel like it's a full game. I am not a fan of this one. But in kind of a reverse situation of the first Legend of Spyro game, this game is actually decent on DS and GBA. The Legend of Spyro Dawn of the Dragon, I'm a bit mixed on, because it's definitely better than the Eternal Night, but I don't know if I'd call it better than A New Beginning or not. Like, don't get me wrong, the combat and a lot of stuff in the gameplay is a lot better than the previous two Legend of Spyro games, and being able to fly just about anywhere with almost no limitations sounds like a really good idea, and it was in the levels like Avalar and stuff. But when you start doing missions and go to other levels, the mechanics start to show their problems, and pun slightly intended, the levels start dragging on a bit. There are also moments where I get lost and I'm not really sure what to do at that moment, or I might have to look up what to do, and that's why I'm really mixed on this game, because it had a lot of potential, but it kind of fell flat in some areas. As for the DS version, well, it kind of feels like a mediocre sequel to the GBA games, despite it being on DS and despite the DS's capabilities shown off in the Eternal Night. Now, I know this isn't really a Spyro game, but it's got Spyro's name in it, so I'm at least kind of counting it here. Skylanders Spyro's Adventure is, well, it's not a very good Spyro game at all, but it's a alright Skylanders game. I've only played a little bit of this game, as I couldn't really get into it. Again, I'm not really counting it as much of a Spyro game, but since it's got Spyro's name in it, I'm just going to say, not a good Spyro game, but an okay game overall. And finally, as of this video, there's Spyro Reignited Trilogy, which I thought was a pretty awesome way to play the trilogy. Just not exactly a flawless way to play the trilogy. They took the original PS1 trilogy and added a lot of improvements, and I'm not just talking about graphics, I'm talking about in terms of gameplay as well. The problem is, it feels like it was very rushed, which it was very rushed. It was originally supposed to come out in September of 2018, but it ended up coming out in November, and even then, it still felt like it needed more time, especially Spyro 3. But, despite all that, I still think it's a really fun way to play the trilogy. And those are my thoughts on the Spyro franchise as a whole. As for the other stuff that have come out, I'm mainly sticking with media, and there's not really any other media that Spyro has come out on other than video games. He was also in that Skylander show, but I'm not counting that here. So, yeah, I think overall Spyro is a decent series. I mean, there's a lot of games that I couldn't really get into or I just do not like, but I really love the original trilogy. I have a guilty pleasure for The Legend of Spyro 1, so overall, I'd still say I really like Spyro. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this type of video, and thank you for watching if you made it all the way through. Go ahead and like it if you did like it. Subscribe if you want to see more of these or any other types of videos that I make on this channel. And I appreciate you all for watching. Happy 25th anniversary, Spyro.